Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nashtaprayeshva Badrishu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyutama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. We're reading Srimad-Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 7. The son of Drona punished. Text number 2. Suto Vacha Brahmanadyam Sarasvatyam Ashramaha Paschime Tate Shamyaprasa Iti Prokta Rishinam Satravardhanaha Sutovacha Brahmanadyam Sarasvatyam Brahmanadyam Sarasvatyam Ashramah Paschimetate Ashramah Paschimetate Shamya Prasa iti Prokta Shamya Prasa iti Prokta Rishinam Satravardhanaha Rishinam Satravardhanaha Sutaha Shri Suta Uvacha said Brahmanadyam on the bank of the river, intimately related with Vedas, Brahmanas, saints, and the Lord. Sarasvatyam, Saraswati, Ashramaha, cottage for meditation. Paschime, on the west. Tate, bank. Shamyaprasaha, the place named Shamyaprasa. Iti, thus. Proktaha, said to be. Rishinam, of the sages. Satravardhanaha, that which enlivens activities. Translation. Sri Suta said, on the western bank of the river Saraswati, which is intimately related to the Vedas, there is a cottage for meditation at Shamyaprasa, which enlivens the transcendental activities of the sages. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vijnana Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. For spiritual advancement of knowledge, a suitable place and atmosphere are definitely required. The place on the western bank of the Saraswati is especially suitable for this purpose. And there is the ashrama of Vyasadeva at Shamyaprasa. Srila Vyasadeva was a householder, yet his residential place is called an ashrama. An ashrama is a place where spiritual culture is always foremost. It does not matter whether the place belongs to a householder or a mendicant. The whole varnashrama system is so designed that each and every status of life is called an ashrama. This means that spiritual culture is the common factor for all. The brahmacharis, the grihastas, the vanaprasthas, and the sannyasis all belong to the same mission of life, namely, realization of the Supreme. Therefore, none of them are less important as far as spiritual culture is concerned. The difference is a matter of formality on the strength of renunciation. The sannyasis are held in high estimation on the strength of practical renunciation. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai Prabhupada.
Sutu vacha brahmanadyam sarasvatyam ashramah paschimetate shamya prasa iti praktarishinam satravardhanaham. Sri Suta said, on the western bank of the river Saraswati, which is intimately related with the Vedas, there is a cottage for meditation at Shamya Prasa, which enlivens the transcendental activities of the sages. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vijnana Goswami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine Vanchakalpatarubhescha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Ajanulambita Pujo Kanakavadatam Sankirtanai Kapitaro Kamalaya Daksha Vishwambaro Dvijavaro Yugadharma Palo Vande Jagat Priyakaro Karunavatar Yantah Pravishimam Vashimam Prasuptam Sanjeevayata Kila Shakti Darak Svadam Anyam Shahasta Charana Shavana Tvagadim Prananamo Bhagavate Purushaya Tumi Yam Pravrajantam Anupetam Apeta Kritim Dvaipayana Virahakatara Juhava Putreti Tanmayatayo Taravo Vinedus Tam Sarva Bhuta Hridayam Munimanatosmi. Hare Krishna. So, with your blessings, I will try to say something about this particular verse and the chapter of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. The first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which we are reading, is the glorification of Srimad-Bhagavatam itself. To understand the book, we have to have a proper mood, the mood of reverence. If the book is cheap, if it's some cheap sort of fiction, then there is no really reverence. There is nothing serious you have to understand. And even ordinary books, to create some understanding, if it's a serious book, the very appearance of this book instills this mood. So the author of Srimad-Bhagavatam, by writing the first canto, the whole first canto is actually devoted to the subject matter for us to understand how serious is the subject matter of Srimad-Bhagavatam. And it's done in a very indirect way. It's not directly, although there is direct clarification of Srimad-Bhagavatam, like at the end of the third chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, where it is said that in Srimad-Bhagavatam the dharma, the religion, and the knowledge took shelter after the disappearance of the Lord. But mostly it's being done throughout the whole first canto by glorifying the speaker and the listener of the Srimad-Bhagavatam. Because the higher is the position of the speaker, the more elevated is the consciousness of the speaker, and the more elevated is the consciousness of the listener, the more elevated subject matter will be exchanged between them. And especially the listener is most important ingredient, because the speaker may be very elevated, but if he sees the audience which is tamasic, like when we go out on the streets and there is quite you will not start speaking some elevated subject matters to them. You will probably say something which they can relate to. So therefore, both speaker and listener is very important to understand what will transpire between them, what will take place between them, and how important it is. And basically, this first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam is divided into 3 parts according to 3 pairs of speakers and listeners. The first 3 chapters of Srimad-Bhagavatam more or less describing the first pair of speaker and listener. Sukadeva Goswami as the speaker and Shaunaka Rishi and the sages of Naimisaranya as listeners. The second 3 chapters, 4th, 5th and 6th, describe the second pair of speakers and listeners, which is Narada Muni as the speaker and Vyasadeva as the listener, or sages who were attended by Narada Muni in his previous life, and little boy Narada Muni as the son of maidservant as the listener. And the rest of Bhagavatam, starting with this chapter, the 7th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is actually describing the glories of Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaja Pariksit. And according to the relative importance of the speaker and listener, or a relative position of the speaker and listeners, we can see that actually there is a gradation here. It is said that Sutta Goswami and the sages of Naimisharanya are Kanishta speaker and Kanishka listeners. Kanishta means the lowest possible grade. Actually, in the very beginning of Srimad-Bhagavatam, it is said that the Srimad-Bhagavatam is a Paramahamsa Samhita. It's the book for Paramahamsas. So, the Sutta Goswami and the sages of Naimisharanya are Paramahamsas, but they're lowest grade of Paramahamsas. And for us to understand Srimad-Bhagavatam, or for Srimad-Bhagavatam, for the experience of Srimad-Bhagavatam to happen, we have to understand clearly what should be the qualification of the listener, both of the listener and the speaker. Basically, the idea behind this first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam is to say that the real experience of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is, as Srila Prabhupada explains in the first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is that you can see the Lord on every page of this book. To have this experience, not just to theoretically listen and get some theoretical understanding, but to have the real experience or real spiritual experience by reading this book, you have to have certain qualification as a listener, and you have to have certain qualification as the speaker. And the lowest possible grade is, of course, Sutta Goswami and Shaunaka Rishi and the sages of Naimisharanya. And the indication there is that it is said in the very beginning of the first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, they were doing this sacrifice, which is somewhat mundane sacrifice. Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he places sages of Naimisharanya even lower than Kanishta Adhikaris. He says that they're just, inquisitive people. But still, they are inquisitive, and they got elevated by listening Srimad-Bhagavatam to the platform of pure devotional service. Before that, as it is said there, they were covered by smoke. What does it mean that they were covered by smoke? It's a figurative statement that their consciousness was covered. And why their consciousness was covered, and which way their consciousness was covered? Because they were doing this sacrifice, and usually Vedic sacrifice are for some material purpose. It may be highly elevated material purpose, nevertheless it's a material purpose, and therefore while saying that they were totally covered by smoke, means for a long time they were really working hard for achievement some certain material goal. But they did have qualification, very important qualification, which is listed here in this first canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam regarding the sages of Naimisharanya, is that they had complete faith in Suta Goswami. The faith is very important preliminary qualification. And the faith, particularly the faith in Parampara system, in Guru-disciple relationship, the implicit faith in this principle of transmission of spiritual knowledge from the Guru towards the disciple is the minimum qualification for Srimad-Bhagavatam to have an effect. If we don't have this faith, there is no use to waste your time by reading Srimad-Bhagavatam. And of course, there is some benefit in any case, but still, for the real experience, and Srimad-Bhagavatam is about experience. It's not about anything else. From the very beginning of Srimad-Bhagavatam, Srila Vyasadeva says that Dharma kaitava projeta paramo nirmatsaranam satam vedyam vastavam matra vastu shivadam tapotrayon mulanam Srimad-Bhagavatam mahamuni krite kim va parair ishvara sadyo hridya varudyate tra kriti bhik sushrushu bhik tatshanat. This is actually what's supposed to happen. Sadyo hridya varudyate. Immediately the Lord should be confined in your heart. Sadyo, immediately. From the very beginning, when you have the desire to listen Srimad-Bhagavatam, not even listening Srimad-Bhagavatam, but only when you develop the desire to listen Srimad-Bhagavatam, the Lord enters your heart and becomes the prisoner of your heart. Avarudyate, sadya hridya varudyate, tra kriti bhik. If you are kriti, and sushrushu bhik, if you have the desire to listen and if your heart is somewhat pure, of course, Lord will not become the prisoner of some dirty heart like ours with all kinds of strange desires. But again, the description which is there in the very beginning of Srimad-Bhagavatam, in the first 3 chapters of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is that the sages of Naimisharanya again and again express their implicit and explicit also faith into Suta Goswami, glorifying him and saying that you can really enlighten us. And when we judge relative importance of the listeners and speakers, the 2 factors are very important, being again indirectly described in Srimad-Bhagavatam. One factor is the renunciation of the speaker and the listeners. The more renounced you are, the more pure your consciousness is, the more chances is there that you will understand the very elevated subject matter of Srimad-Bhagavatam. If you are not renounced, your mind will do projection. You will read Srimad-Bhagavatam and you will project it into the material sphere. And the next very important characteristic of the listener and speakers is how much Lord is personally involved in their life. When we see the first pair of listener and speakers, there is practically no mention of personal involvement of the Lord, besides somehow or other they got together. But when we see Maharaja Pariksit and Sukadeva Goswami, we can see that there is a lot of personal involvement, especially in the life of Maharaja Pariksit. It basically means that there is, from the very beginning, there is a glory, there is a mercy of the Lord which is being played into whole equation for Srimad-Bhagavatam to be spoken. Anyway, so the next 3 chapters describes Narada Muni and the Paramahamsas, the Bhakti Vedantas who came to visit him. And there is definitely a lot more free will of the Lord involved into the whole event. Somehow or other, the sages came to visit little child, and the renunciation is also indicated there. The sages were completely renounced. They were only there for 4 months, and the little boy was totally renounced. He didn't even want to play his childish games, and therefore it is said there, it's not indicated for how long the sages of Naimisharanya were listening to Srimad-Bhagavatam. It is said that, you know, in Skanda Purana, that the lowest grade, the worst kind of listening Srimad-Bhagavatam and is when you listen and you don't know when it ends, and it just drags and drags and drags, and by the time you listen something, you forgot what was there before. So that's the tamasic listening of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is usually take place in our in our but anyway, but it is specifically said that Paramahamsas were there for 4 months, and we know that Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaja Pariksit only 7 days. After 7 days, the perfection was there. After 4 months, in the case of Narada Muni and Bhakti Vedantas. So we can see that the efficiency of this process is also being described indirectly. If all the conditions are in place, then very quickly you will realize Lord face to face. And that's basically the perfection of the listening of Srimad-Bhagavatam. That's what we're supposed to have. At the end of listening to Srimad-Bhagavatam, we should have Lord face to face and, you know, getting some nice conversation with him. Ideally, if it works. So what we see now, the beginning of the 3rd section of the 1st canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, where this glorification of Sukadeva Goswami and Maharaja Pariksit is being done. And this 7th chapter has 3 different parts. In the beginning, the Vyasadeva's trance is being described, the samadhi of Srila Vyasadeva. How Srimad-Bhagavatam, the whole 7th chapter is actually about how Srimad-Bhagavatam appeared in this world. What are the reasons of the appearance of Srimad-Bhagavatam, how it appeared, and what is the significance of Srimad-Bhagavatam more specifically. So in the beginning, the samadhi of Vyasadeva is being described. The next part of the 7th chapter is about its glorification of the speaker of Srimad-Bhagavatam, the main speaker. If Sutta Goswami and sages of Naimisharanya were Kanishta speaker and listener, Narada Muni and the Paramahamsas, Bhakti Vedantas were madhyama speakers. Here we have uttama, speaker and listeners. Sukadeva Goswami is uttama vakta of Srimad-Bhagavatam, and Maharaja Pariksit is uttama shrota, the uttama listener, the highest possible listener, highest possible qualification is there. And therefore, we can see how in this 7th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, the glorification of renunciation of Sukadeva Goswami will be described. Why renunciation, why vairagya is so important? Because vairagya is the external manifestation of your devotion. Devotion is a difficult thing to describe. You know, when we try to describe devotion, devotion is an internal experience. But externally, devotion is manifest as renunciation, as vairagya. It is said in Chaitanya Charitamrita that everyone was completely amazed by the level of renunciation which the direct associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu manifested. Their renunciation was unheard of. Why? Not renunciation itself. Renunciation from our point of view is useless in itself. But that's an indication of devotion, because when your consciousness is completely turned out from this world and completely concentrated and on the spiritual subject matter, then the renunciation is natural. It's a byproduct. It's not the practice. Sometimes devotees do this. They think that renunciation is a spiritual practice. Srila Rupa Goswami says it's even detrimental for devotional service because it makes your heart hard. Your heart, if you are too much into renunciation, if you don't take sometimes maha sweets, it's not very beneficial for developing your bhakti. Sometimes you need to have some nice prasadam. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada was very lenient in this regard. He said, no problem. Renunciation is natural. There was this story about one boy who was coming to Srila Prabhupada, and he used to have 20 chapatis at once. And Prabhupada was so happy that he would take, the big stack of pile of chapatis. And then he said, yeah, just eat. Ultimately, naturally, the renunciation will take place in your heart. Because bhakti is a natural process, and therefore, when Srimad-Bhagavatam or Srila Vyasadeva or Sutta Goswami, in this particular case, glorifies the renunciation of Sukadeva Goswami. Sukadeva Goswami was so renounced that he was so naturally renounced that when the ladies were, taking baths in the river, and he was passing by and he was completely naked, they just couldn't care less. Because he was so transcendental and they could feel it. And then Vyasadeva was following behind him, and they became completely embarrassed and started dressing themselves up. And he asked them, why are you doing this? And they said, because you are Vyasadeva and he is Sukadeva. Because you distinguish between this. And he's not. He doesn't see any distinction. He's not interested in this. For him, it doesn't matter who is taking baths there. He's not really looking at them. So, and basically what is described here in the second part of the 7th chapter, renunciation of Sukadeva Goswami, and of course, his attraction to the Lord's qualities. Itam bhuta gunai harihi. The famous Atmarama verse says that he was so much attracted to the qualities of the Lord that he, even though he was completely renounced, again and again this point is being repeated in the 7th chapter, that he was completely renounced. He had nothing to do with this world. Still, he decided to listen to Srimad-Bhagavatam. Why? Itam bhuta gunai harihi. Because this is the attraction of Krishna's qualities, which have nothing to do with this material world. And the third part of this particular chapter is actually about surrender of the devotee. Because starting from the third part of the 7th chapter till the very end, the qualification of the listener of Srimad-Bhagavatam is being described. Uttama listener, Maharaja Pariksit. And the prominent quality of Maharaja Pariksit which he inherited from his ancestors, from the Pandavas, is complete surrender. And that's exactly what we see here in the 7th chapter. Why this whole story about Vashvatama and his Brahmastra, his first Brahmastra. It's actually, in Srimad-Bhagavatam, it is explained that Ashwatthama, 2 times he released Brahmastra. And actually the first Brahmastra, the release of the first Brahmastra was not really important as such, because it's when Ashwatthama released Brahmastra for the 2nd time, then the Lord had to protect Pariksit. So logically speaking, if we only have the straight line of the narration, we don't need to hear about the first Brahmastra. If it's a question about Lord's protection on Maharaja Pariksit, then he could start from the 2nd Brahmastra. But why the first episode is being described in such a detail in the 7th chapter? Because this episode illustrates the complete surrender of the forefathers of Maharaja Pariksit. So his surrender is inherited in one sense, because when you are being born in a certain family, you naturally inherit certain qualities of this family. You adopt and imbibe the qualities which are there prominent in the tradition, in the family. And basically, again, what is being said to us, why it is relevant to us. The relevance for us is that we have to be completely surrendered to really understand Srimad-Bhagavatam. Surrender to the will of the Lord, accepting His will as the supreme in our own lives. And of course, it's also very interestingly described that surrender doesn't mean that you become completely blinded and you become completely dull and completely, you have the blind face. Surrender, which is described here in the 7th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, Arjuna was completely surrendered. By the surrender gave him transcendental intelligence by which he could make a very difficult decision. He could satisfy 2 parties which were demanding opposing, totally opposing desires they had. Somebody says, kill Ashwatthama, another says, no, save him. And Arjuna, and Krishna says, you do something which would satisfy both. Not an easy task. So what is being indicated by this particular episode is that real surrender, genuine surrender, awakens the intelligence. Badri Narayan Maharaj once told a very beautiful story that in their Sankirtan day, they had a Sankirtan leader who was totally, completely surrendered. Surrendered means basically, he couldn't care less whether there is petrol in the car or not. He was surrendered. Krishna will take care of it. And if the car would stop somewhere in the middle of the city, he said, okay, Krishna wanted the car to stop. And it means that we don't distribute books today, we just sit in the car and read the books, no problem. So all kinds of crazy and completely unusual ways of, manifesting. And his motto, was always, Krishna wants this, Krishna wants, this car is broken, okay, Krishna wants this, okay, no problem. So, and then, some devotees, they felt that something is wrong there. And they asked him to write a letter to Srila Prabhupada. And he wrote a letter in a particular way. He formulated a letter because there is a special art to ask a question in such a way that you get the necessary answer. It's a very important art which you have to know. because you already know the answer, but you ask the question in such a way that you get it. So very carefully he formulated the letter, asking, how, isn't it we should be completely surrendered to the will of the Lord and whatever. Somehow or other, he indicated very clearly what he wants to get from Prabhupada. And Prabhupada wrote back one line: surrender means awakening of transcendental intelligence. He could see through this, this bogus sort of mentality. And that's exactly what is being depicted in this particular chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, while explaining this episode with Arjuna, because this is the surrender. Surrender means, in a very difficult situation, you know the will of the Lord. You know, and you can fulfill the will of the Lord. Surrender doesn't mean you're just completely, dull and you just, yeah, right, I'm surrendered. Do whatever you like with me. No, surrender means you know what the Lord wants from you. In this particular situation, how the Lord wants you to act. That's surrender. Because your intelligence is completely dependent on the Lord, on the will of the Lord, directed by the will of the Lord. And you directly see, you understand, you are under the guidance. Dadami buddhi yogam tam yanamam payanti te. The Lord gives you intelligence. You're not independent anymore, and therefore your intelligence is God-given intelligence. This is how, again, the listeners of Srimad-Bhagavatam are being glorified as the most important preliminary qualification for us to understand Srimad-Bhagavatam. We have to be surrendered. And we are reading now. When should I finish the class?
8:30, 8:45.
Okay.
8:45.
Okay. So we're beginning this. This is just to give some little background of the whole of the verse which we are reading. And we are beginning to read this first section of the 7th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which is describing the trance of samadhi of Srila Vyasadeva. And here in this particular verse, which is most important, Srila Jiva Goswami takes these few verses, just 3-4 verses of the description of samadhi of Vyasadeva to explain the very essence of Srimad-Bhagavatam. Basically, the second section of Tattva Sandarbha, which is the foundation for the whole understanding of Srimad-Bhagavatam, is explaining these few verses from the 7th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, from the first canto, 7th chapter of Srimad-Bhagavatam, which explains in detail what Srila Vyasadeva has seen in his samadhi, in his trance. Because the whole Srimad-Bhagavatam is actually a description of what he has seen or his experience. Srimad-Bhagavatam is not just a book. It's not a fiction. It's not some fictitious story. It's the transmission of real spiritual experience. And when we read Srimad-Bhagavatam, we are supposed to get the same experience, more or less. We are supposed to, or at least that's the ideal, that's how it should be. We should get ultimately into this samadhi and get the same experience as Srila Vyasadeva had in his trance while he was there in Badarikashram. So therefore it's so important for us to understand the circumstances of this samadhi, the circumstances of this experience. And therefore, Sutta Goswami starts explaining his samadhi by explaining the place where this samadhi took place. And he says here that it was on the bank of Brahmanadyam Saraswatyam, Paschimetate, on the western bank of Brahmanadyam. Saraswati, very importantly, it is explained here that Saraswati, the river Saraswati, is called Brahmanadi. Brahmanadi means spiritual river. So again, basically, and Saraswati means knowledge. Basically, even though it's a description of Badarikashram, which is high up in Himalayas, and Saraswati is still there. It's a very short distance. Saraswati is there just a few hundred meters only. It's gushing from the mountain with huge force. It's a very amazing place where the Saraswati river takes place. It's immense. It's very powerful. But it immediately, merges with Alakananda river and so on and so forth. Only very short distance of it. And Vyasadev's ashram is still there. It's a cave in Himalayas. And what is the most amazing about this cave is that the cave is in the form of the book. It's externally shaped like the book, where Vyasadeva was living. That was his ashram. So if at one point you will have your own ashram, you can make it in the form of a book. Yeah. So that's what it is. That's high up in this Badarikashram. And it is said, Brahmanadyam Saraswatyam. So again, Brahmanadyam Saraswatyam basically means that he is on the bank of this Saraswati river, but he is also on the bank of the river of knowledge, spiritual knowledge. This spiritual knowledge which is beyond this material world. Brahmanadyam Saraswatyam Ashrama. So he built his ashram, or his dwelling place, his place of living on the bank of the river of knowledge, basically. And what it means for us. It means for us, here is ashram. And the ashram should be on the bank of the river of knowledge. The river Saraswati, Brahmanadyam Saraswatyam, should always flow in this ashram. This ashram will only remain an ashram, the real place of spiritual experience, if the spiritual knowledge or transmission of spiritual knowledge is constantly being done here. Constantly means regularly, it doesn't mean 24 hours a day. It means that the spiritual knowledge should be one of the main characteristics of this place. Then only it becomes ashrama. Ashrama paschimetate. And Prabhupada, of course, explains what does ashrama means. Shrama in Sanskrit means useless labor. And ashrama means no useless labor. But ashrama means a lot of labor, but not useless labor. So ashrama is a place where there is a hard work. Ashrama is a place, as Prabhupada said, ashrama is not the place for lazy and crazy, for lazies and crazies. And that's Srila Prabhupada's translation of the word ashrama from Sanskrit. It's not a place for lazy people and for crazy people. It's the place for spiritual development, and therefore it's called ashrama. And Prabhupada, of course, explains that spirituality should be forefront, should be the main focus of the whole thing, And then, if this atmosphere is so charged by this spirituality, it's actually very easy to be engaged, because it is specifically said here, Satravardhana. Srila Prabhupada very interestingly translates this, that which enlivens activities. But literally what it means, Satra means sacrifice. Satra is a generic name for sacrifice, and Vardhana means how you say this, increase or expansion. expansion. So Rishinam Satravardhanaha basically means it's the place where the expansion of spiritual activities or the sacrificial activities takes place. Rishinam, those rishi, those sages who, rishi means those people who have real spiritual experience, Satravardhanaha. So this place is conducive for this, for the expansion of spiritual activities. In other words, Prabhupada writes here, enlivens activities. It basically means that by being in this place, you feel the enthusiasm to do something good, something spiritual. You feel the enthusiasm to do some sacrifice, basically. Sankirtana Yagya, Yoga Dharma Yagya. So that's what is indicated. The atmosphere of the place is such that it should basically enliven you to do it. It's not that you're forced to do it. If you don't do it, you don't get your breakfast and lunch and you will starve. No, it's just you want to do it. Why do you want to do it? Because this is the atmosphere. This is what it is, and this is how it is explained. That's why it is ashramam. If the atmosphere is like this, Brahmanadim, if the Saraswati, if the knowledge is there, if the river of knowledge is flowing there, that naturally you will have the enthusiasm. It's actually a fact. If the real knowledge, if you feel that this is something real, you know, that this is something which is directly connected with the truth, you get enlivened. When you feel that you're getting in touch with some higher truth, the enthusiasm, the utsaha or mahotsaha comes naturally within the heart. You get the natural enthusiasm to do it. Therefore, it is said, Rishinam Satravardhanaha. And another very important word in this particular verse, which we read, Shamya Prasa iti proktam. This place, it is said here, it's called Shamya Prasa. The place of Srila Vyasadeva's ashram is called Shamya Prasa, which basically means, and it will be said in the next, no, just 1 second. Okay, no. Shamya means from the word shama. Shama means peace. And it is explained by some of the commentators of Srimad-Bhagavatam that Shamya Prasa means the place where all the three modes of nature are balanced. Where there is a certain combination of the modes of nature where they are not, where they're balancing each other. It basically means that there is no imbalance in our mind, because the atmosphere around us directly influences our mind. And if in the atmosphere around us the tamagun is prominent, we will naturally be inclined to some tamasic activities. If the rajagun is prominent, we will naturally be inclined to some tamasic activities. If sattvagun is very prominent, sattvic activities will take place. But for transcendental activities, we should go beyond this, and for that the balance of three gunas should be there. Because transcendental activities, of course, sattva guna is conducive for transcendental activities, no doubt about it. It should be prevalent and prominent as much as, and the balance, basically, the balance of three modes of material nature means the prominence of sattva guna. When sattva guna is prominent and rajagun and tamagun is subdued, but still then in a very balanced condition, which creates peaceful situation, and on the background of this peace you can really get the spiritual experience while chanting the holy name or reading Srimad-Bhagavatam or associating with devotees and getting into this. So this is Shamya Prasa, the meaning or significance of this word Shamya Prasa iti prakta, the name of this. So it's interesting because here we are in this ashram, and we have to try to, to have this in place, that Brahmanadyam Saraswatyam, the river Saraswati, or the river of spiritual knowledge, should be there. The Satravardhana, Rishinam Satravardhana, the expansion of the sacrifice, of Yuga Dharma sacrifice, should take place here. And Shamya Prasa, the whole place should be very peaceful. The whole situation should be peaceful with the prominence of Sattva Gun, but not for the sake of Sattva Gun itself. Because sometimes people, they just, into this Sattva Gun for the sake of Sattva Gun, to get some sattvic happiness. But for the sake of having some peace in mind, which will bring about some real spiritual experience again. Or samadhi. Ultimately, we will have to be in this samadhi and completely in this samadhi. Prabhupada said, work now, samadhi later, but basically it means that we have to have this, ultimately, this goal to see the Lord, but the conditions for this are explained here. And there is another interpretation of this word Shamya Prasa, which is also quite interesting, related to this word Satravardhanaha. Shamya Prasa, sometimes it's called or derived from the word Shami. And Shami, like Shamin, Shami means it's the name of the tree. It's a particular tree, a very holy tree, where Arjuna kept his weapons for 1 year while he was in the kingdom of King Virata. And Shami is also used to ignite the fire for sacrifice. Shami tree, Aranya tree and Shami tree also. And Shami was very much prevalent during the sacrifice because it's a very pure tree. And how they used to define the place for sacrifice. They would take wood, this Shami wood, some club created from the Shami tree. And they would throw this club from Shami tree, and when the club would fall, this is the place suitable for sacrifice. So basically what is again indicated by this name of Shamya Prasa is that this is the place which is suitable for sacrifice. This is the place which is sanctified for the sacrifice, because you cannot do sacrifice in any place. You first have to sanctify the place. Only then the sacrifice will have an effect. Only then the sacrifice will bring the desired fruit of it. So that's basically about this particular verse of Srimad-Bhagavatam which we are reading today. And of course, again, Srila Prabhupada, he explains that ashrama means the place of spiritual activities, and basically any position of our life should be ashrama. It's not no license. Ashrama should be there. Grihastha ashrama, vanaprastha ashrama, sannyasa ashrama. It's all ashrama. All the place where we want to achieve the spiritual goal by the conducive means. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Maybe there is some question. Yes.
There's in the 5th canto, 10th chapter, where Maharaja Pariksit meets Judge Bart. And he realizes that he's actually a very great advanced devotee, and he asks forgiveness, and then Judge Bart gives his initial statements and instructions. Maharaja Pariksit is dumbfounded, and he asks Judge Bart to explain a little more clearly because I can't understand. And so Prabhupada's purport, he describes that greatly advanced devotees like Judge Bart, Sukadeva Goswami, what they speak is approved spiritual instructions that only very advanced personalities can understand. And sometimes it is very risky to give highly advanced instructions to ordinary men. Very nice purport. I'm just basically summarizing. And then Prabhupada goes on to say, our Lord Chaitanya has given us the method of Harinam Sankirtan, which will elevate the general populace so that they can ultimately understand exalted spiritual instructions, such as Bhagavad Gita and Srimad-Bhagavatam. And we, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, follow in Lord Chaitanya's footsteps by doing the same thing. So, just thought I'd offer that.
Yeah, thank you very much. And when Srila Prabhupada came to Australia, he said, here is only restaurants and Harinam, nothing else. Nothing else will work here. So, yes. Said, and mostly restaurants. So, yes, it's a fact. It's a fact. For people to understand Srimad-Bhagavatam, it's not easy. It's not easy to have the real experience or to have the deep understanding, or But Harinam Sankirtan everyone likes. Everyone likes. We were doing Sankirtan recently in the 2nd Avenue and in Tompkins Square Park, little group of Russian devotees there. And everyone was just, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Everyone was happy. Even dragatics and all kinds of people. Especially dragatics. Yes.
Could you maybe go deeper and describe the parallel between Bhagavatam and Nam Sankirtan? Lord Chaitanya says, Vidyavadu Jivanam.
Yeah, when Lord Chaitanya says Vidyavadu Jivanam, he means that at a certain stage of our cultivation of the holy name, we will get the spiritual experience or the awakening of spiritual knowledge, which means the understanding of our spiritual relationship in details with God. That only take place at a certain stage of spiritual development, therefore, Chetadarpanam Arjanam Bhavamahadavagni Nirvapanam Shreyah Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam should take place before that. It's basically the stage which is being indicated by this phrase Vidyavadu Jivanam is asakti. And Shreyah Kairava Chandrika Vitaranam is ruchi. When the white lotus of your fortune is being expanded and flourished, that's when you get the spiritual taste, ruchi. And Bhava Mahadavagni Nirvapanam, that nishta, when you are not bothered by the fire of the desires which are there in your heart. And Chetadarpanam Arjanam is the previous stages of spiritual development, which is basically anartha nivriti, or leading to anartha nivriti. So at a certain stage of cultivation of the holy name, the spiritual knowledge will be awakened within your heart, and that is indicated by this Vidyavadu Jivanam. And the same thing, the Srimad-Bhagavatam is also supposed to be for the same purpose, because it is specifically said in the 12th canto of Srimad-Bhagavatam, while Sukadeva Goswami, or it's actually Sutta Goswami, I believe, or maybe still Sukadeva Goswami, I don't remember. But anyway, it is said there that Maharaja Pariksit, just by listening Srimad-Bhagavatam, achieved his Svarupa, his spiritual relationship with the Lord. So the same result took place within 7 days of listening Srimad-Bhagavatam, and the same result is supposed to take place if we properly study and listen Srimad-Bhagavatam and at the same time cultivate the holy name, or serve the holy name by chanting the holy name, and serve Srimad-Bhagavatam by studying Srimad-Bhagavatam and listening Srimad-Bhagavatam. So the same result, but also Srila Prabhupada, he was very emphatic when he said or spoke about the need of listening Nityam Bhagavata Seva, regular listening Srimad-Bhagavatam, because he said that your chanting of the holy name will become much more meaningful, and if it goes hand by hand with studying Srimad-Bhagavatam, because Srimad-Bhagavatam gives the content of your chanting, gives your consciousness, tunes in your consciousness for proper chanting. Otherwise, your chanting is doomed to be offensive. Therefore, studying Srimad-Bhagavatam and chanting are both most important, and actually create a background for this real experience. Yes.
Perhaps the most powerful example of having to take shelter of reading Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada's books, if your service is to distribute the books.
Yes.
You must.
Definitely. Yes, and Prabhupada was also emphatic. He said you should distribute, but you should know what is in my books. Not distributing. Yes. Huh?
So Maharaj, you were explaining about how renunciation is a natural exhibition of devotion. Yeah. So, but at the same time, newcomers are recommended, for instance, to renounce meat eating, illicit sex, intoxication. So some renunciation is recommended initially, where we fast on the Ekadashi, other things like this. So, but how do we know that our austerity that we are undertaking is
artificial, or it is natural?
Natural or artificial, yeah.
When Prabhupada says, thank you for this question, it's a very good question. When Prabhupada says about these 4 regulative principles, it's a very basic thing. Without renouncing this, you will not be able to achieve anything in the spiritual life. It's a very minimum thing. Why it is? I've been studying the mechanisms, the physiological mechanism behind this 4 regulative principles, or breaking the 4 regulative principles. Basically, if you are not following the 4 regulative principles, what you are doing, you are there is a reward system in our brain. And when we break 4 regulative principles, we are hacking into the reward system. We are more or less overloading or creating some unnatural rewards. which make us addicted. These four things, they're all addictive. They're totally addictive. And they concentrate your consciousness upon your body. You cannot really withdraw your consciousness from your body for a split second unless you stop these illicit activities, gross illicit activities. Enjoyment, there is enjoyment and there is enjoyment. There is enjoyment which produces the result, which is hacking the reward system, produce inordinate reward which is too much, which is addictive, which makes you it actually spoils or insensitizes your reward system. What happens if you take drugs, for example, or if you take meat, or if you take or if you gamble, or if you have illicit sex relationship, then you will get such a pleasure, then normal pleasure will become meaningless to you, and you will not be able to experience normal happiness or peace in life when you get some other enjoyment. And you will be addicted to get more and more enjoyment of this sort, which is illegal ultimately, because it totally spoils your nervous system. Any person who misuses this reward system for to get enjoyment again and again and again, ultimately completely spoils the nervous system. It's total, complete stress. When you get all this stuff, you get enormous stress on your nervous system, and you cannot be happy just by living normal life. You need some extra doses of all this enjoyment. So this sort of renunciation, it's not really renunciation, it's just normal life. and Prabhupada, therefore he said, it's just something to calm you down, to make you happy by leading normal life. It's nothing else. It's not renunciation. It's just for you to become a little sane, and then develop further from this point on. And of course, because we are insane, because we are trained in a very insane culture, it's difficult for us to become all of a sudden sane, and therefore some training is required even for this. But it's not really renunciation. This is something common, but because and therefore we say it from the very beginning. But Prabhupada, in the very beginning, he didn't say it. When he started speaking, of course, we say it now. But Prabhupada, in the beginning, he said, "Okay, no problem. Just take more prasadam. You will get some relief from it." Yeah. Then he formulated. After some time, he formulated this thing, and it's important for us to understand that this is minimum standard, because according to Mahabharata story, the one demon Mada was cut into 4 pieces, and 4 pieces of this Mada Asura was placed into these 4 activities: hunting or killing the animals, and gambling, and intoxication, and illicit sex. So everyone who does it becomes mad, literally mad. And if it's just a straight path to madness, straight path to madness. So don't worry, you are not overdoing it. Anything extra, to fast one day in 2 weeks of, from grains, it's not a big deal. Anything extra is, renunciation. This is just normal life.
Maharaj, but there's also like a certain intoxication you get from Sankirtan. What does an intoxication do to your nervous system?
No, that is healthy for your nervous system. Yes. You get intoxication, yes, but that's another kind of intoxication that makes you happy. It's not addictive intoxication. It's a different stuff. It's a nice stuff. Don't worry.
It's medicine.
It's medicinal. Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Premanande.